eco-hero who shows how they turn poo into power.
We felt focused tonight, from bathing baboons to belligerent badgers.
As 'n ontwikkelende land gaan Suid-Afrika se energieaanvraag vir mynbou, fabrieke, vervoer, voedselproduksie en behuising net al hoe groter word. Op die oomblik kom 90% van die wêreld se energie van goed wat ons verbrand. Fossiel brandstowwe soos olie en steenkool.
And the burning of these fuels contributes towards global warming, while the mining for coal continues to put our ecosystems under pressure. There is a huge drive to look at alternative, clean, renewable resources, such as solar and wind, to replace fossil fuels. But are these technologies capable yet of sustaining the baseload energy required by a developing nation like South Africa?
Tonight we take a look at the pros and the cons of the main sources of energy that must be used to protect us against the looming energy crisis that our country is facing. Technology is advancing, but what are the facts about sustainable energy and what are our options?
Steenkool is tans die wêreld se grootste energiebron vir die opwekking van elektrisiteit. Maar kom ons stel dit in perspektief. Hierdie rugbyveld agter my. Stel jou voor, ons stapel 'n hoop steenkool hier op. 'n kilometer hoog. Dis so hoog soos Tafelberg. Dit is die hoeveelheid steenkool wat net een van Eskom se kragstasies in 'n jaar verbrand. Jaar in en jaar uit. En daardie selfde kragstasie stuur elke jaar 30 miljoen ton koolstofdioksied uit in ons toenemend meer besoedelde atmosfeer. Dis soos die massa van 30 miljoen motorkarre, ver meer as al die motors in ons land. Al daardie gas uit die skoorstene van net een kragstasie. Hey, is hom lekker om so 'n kaggelvuurtjie in die winter te hê. En gelukkig het ons land daarom lekker baie steenkool. Maar moenie te verseker wees nie. Want die kans is goed dat ons so aan die einde van die eeu ons laaste kragstasie sal bou, omdat ons kool dan sal opraak. Wie weet, dalk nog vroeër. Want soos wat ons land ekonomies groei en ons meer en meer mense die hele tyd moet werk gee, gaan ons energiebehoeftes al hoe meer raak.
I would say that the coal that we have could last until the end of the century is probably correct.
Die diagram vertel 'n verhaal wat behoorlik 'n thriller is. Dit wys dat al ons huidige kragstasies die einde van hulle werkende bestaan teen omtrent 2050 sal bereik en hulle sal vervang moet word.
We've got the equivalent of about 10 very big power stations in South Africa. And then this line here shows what we think is going to happen to the demand for electricity. This is where we are now, and there's a big gap between what we have available and what we expect the demand to be. We've got to fill that gap. You can see in 2025, this graph starts dropping off dramatically. And that's because the old power stations will be decommissioned, they reach the end of their life. We can't operate them anymore.
Indien die regering se voorspelling dat ons energiebehoeftes teen omtrent 4% per jaar sal groei realisties is, sal ons teen 2050 die ekwivalent van omtrent 30 groot kragstasies moet bou. En ons sal dit baie gou moet doen. En dan gaan dit nie net 'n paar rand kos nie. Byvoorbeeld, Medupi, die nuwe kragstasie wat naby Ellisras gebou word, gaan 'n raming tussen 100 en 125 miljard rand kos. Met daardie geld kan ons meer as 80 wêreldsokkerbeker toernooie hier in Suid-Afrika hou.
We must realize that this is going to be this country's largest capital expenditure program. It will dwarf the arms deal. The World Cup is a mere drop in the bucket. It's not even a power station, is what we'll have to be spending. So we're going to be spending a huge amount of money.
90% van die energie wat ons in Suid-Afrika produseer, kom van dinge wat ons verbrand, fossiel brandstowwe. Daarom het ons ook groot lugbesoedelingsprobleme, veral in sekere dele van ons land. Dis nie net as gevolg van Eskom nie, maar ook van talle industrieë wat steenkool verbrand.
I believe there's a tremendous task ahead of us to meet the power requirements at that time. We've got to get out of coal because of carbon dioxide. With the best will in the world, I'm a little skeptical about carbon dioxide sequestration, so we've got to get out of coal. The alternative, nuclear is here. It's generated 15% of the world's power for the last 20 years. So nuclear is ready to take over.
Dus, gegee die diensbaarheid en beskikbaarheid van kernkrag in ons land, waarom het die regering besluit om nog duur steenkoolkragstasies te bou? En dit met 'n massiewe Wêreldbanklening van $3.65 miljard. Is dit 'n wyse belegging?
We're opposed to all new coal-fired power stations. We believe that because of climate change, rising carbon emissions, globally speaking, the need for not only South Africa but the entire globe to drastically reduce its carbon emissions over the next 10 years, that coal-fired power stations anywhere in the world are an unwise investment.
Eskom comes from a very narrow background based on cheap fossil fuel. We need to broaden the diversity of our energy sources. That, I think, is an imperative. And in this regard, we need every type of energy source that we can get, including as much renewable and including nuclear as part of the mix.
Indien ons die hele tyd vir meer en meer mense moet werk gee, en voortdurend beter gesondheid en 'n kans op 'n beter bestaan, moet ons land se energiekrisis oplos en vinnig op. Een van ons vorige ministers van minerale hulpbronne het per geleentheid in die pers gesê, en ek sal maar vertaal, ons moet optree volgens die resolusies waar volgens ons energiebronne moet diversifiseer. Ons moet wegbeweeg van steenkool na kernkrag en hernubare energie. Want deesdae het hierdie voorneme in die niet verdwyn. Oral waar jy kyk in ons land word daar steenkoolmyne oopgemaak voor die voet.
Waarom bou Eskom nog 2 steenkoolkragstasies, tesame met die herindiensneming van 'n aantal ou stasies, as steenkool die wêreld so besoedel?
Dis die goedkoopste vorm van krag wat ons nou het. Dis betroubaar. Ons het ongelooflik baie steenkoolbronne. Ons het nog iets soos 25 biljoen ton. So ons land kan nog 100, 200 jaar op steenkool lewe. Maar nou uit die aard van die saak, as jy steenkool gebruik, dan het jy die nadeel dat jou koolstofvoetspoor is baie hoog. As jy na Suid-Afrika kyk en jy vergelyk dit met ander ontwikkelende lande, dan is ons koolstofvoetspoor per capita baie hoog. Eintlik die hoogste na China, Amerika en Europa en so. So ons moet definitief iets doen daaraan in Suid-Afrika om daai voetspoor te verlaag. So ek dink daar's twee elemente. Aan die ander wyse, een, raak meer energiedoeltreffend, gebruik minder koolstof vir dieselfde energie-eenheid. En die tweede ding is, gaan na ander vorme van energie toe. En koolstofbelasting kan eintlik 'n enabler wees. Dit klink nadelig, maar ek dink op die lange duur gaan dit sin maak vir ons ekonomie.
After the break, we continue to look at alternatives to coal, as well as the renewed interest in nuclear energy.
So, as met al hoe meer en meer karre op die pad deesdae. En ons weet die wêreld se oliereserwes gaan ons omtrent nog net vir 40 jaar hou. Die gasreserwes omtrent nog net vir 60 jaar. En selfs nie die huidige duurpryse van ons reserwes op hierdie stadium is ons besig om hulle vinniger op te gebruik as wat ons nuus kan ontdek. En ons weet net eenvoudig nie hoeveel daar nog oor is om te ontdek nie. Feit bly staan. Ons kan nie so aangaan vir altyd nie.
Sasol vervaardig 30% van Suid-Afrika se olie. Maar dit gebruik 50 miljoen ton steenkool elke jaar om dit te kan doen. Dis is om na 'n sokkerveld te kyk wat 5 kilometer hoog opgestapel is met steenkool. 5 keer so hoog soos Tafelberg. Gasturbines is duur om te bedryf. Veral hier by ons waar Eskom diesel gebruik om dit te doen. Maar daar is wel natuurlike gasneerslae aan ons Weskus, wat hierdie opsie dalk goedkoper kan maak. Die inligting tans tot ons beskikking wil aandui dat ons dalk 2 gigawatt energie uit gasturbines kan genereer. Dis die helfte van wat ons hier 'n groot kragstasie noem. Selfs dit sou welkom wees. Maar ons weet hoe onvoorspelbaar gaspryse is.
We also have finite reserves of oil and gas, so in my way of thinking, you should move away from those as quickly as possible towards nuclear and renewables.
Binnelands is daar verskeie biobrandstofstasies reeds voorgestel. Hulle sal die afval van bosbou saagmelens en suikermele verbrand. Daar is ook sprake van die gebruik van metaangas wat uit vullisbergingterreine gaan kom. Al hierdie energiebronne is welkom. Maar hulle is ongelukkig glad nie groot genoeg om die land se energievoorraad te verseker nie. Die feit bly, ons moet probeer om minder fossiel brandstowwe te gebruik. Hernubare energie kom van bronne wat nooit klaar raak nie. Byvoorbeeld krag van water, die son en die wind. Kom ons kyk na elk van hierdie bronne, beginnende met hidrokrag. Hidrokrag kom van water, wat sterk en vinnig vloei om turbines te laat draai om elektrisiteit op te wek. Ongelukkig het Suid-Afrika nie baie groot riviere wat dit kan doen nie. Versiende energiespesialiste praat van 'n Afrika-wye kragnetwerk wat die majestueuse riviere van die Kongo kan inspan. Indien dit volledig ontwikkel kon word, sou die hidro-elektriese aanleg by die Inga-rivier in die Kongo byvoorbeeld genoeg krag vir ons hele land kon voorsien. Maar daar word gesê dat net 7% van die volle hidrokragpotensiaal van Afrika ontwikkel is. Die politiek kan ook 'n rol speel. Kan ons regtig staat maak op 'n kragstasie wat 3000 km ver daar deur in die noorde lê? Om strategiese redes word gesê, is die meeste lande nie bereid om meer as 10 of 12% van hulle kragbehoeftes van oorkant hulle grense te kry nie. Windkrag het entoesiastiese ondersteuners, maar daar is tog probleme. Wat doen mens wanneer die wind nie waai nie?
You can't tell the wind when to blow, so it is not a schedulable power source. You can't just say, wind blow, turn the light on. It doesn't work like that.
Een oplossing word pompberging genoem. Dit beteken dat solank die wind waai, kan water bergop na reuse damme gepomp word. Dan, wanneer die wind gaan lê, word die water toegelaat, net soos met gewone hidrokrag, om weer afdraande te vloei om elektrische turbines te draai.
Wind could be much more competitive, close to probably nuclear. Certainly a lot more expensive than coal-fired power stations.
To build a wind turbine, you need all of the materials that come from smelting our resources. So you've got steel, you've got aluminium, you've got copper, you've got all of those things. And where are we going to get the reliable, consistent, heavy-duty electricity to conduct those smelting operations? Those require 24-hour baseload, and we just don't get those from renewables.
Indien ons sou kyk na windturbines vir ons land se basislasvoorsiening, hoeveel sou ons moes oprig? Dink aan 'n area so groot soos Valsbaai in die Kaap, wat omtrent geheel en al oordek word met die mees gevorderde turbines wat ons vandag kan bou. 2 turbines van 5 megawatt elk op elke vierkante kilometer. Stel jou dan 'n reuse dam bo op Gordons Bay se berg voor, vir wanneer die wind nie waai nie. Nie dat dit moontlik sou wees om dit in praktyk reg te kry nie. Dis wat nodig sou wees om net Koeberg te vervang, Afrika se enigste kernkragstasie 30 km van Kaapstad af. Eskom kyk na 'n verskeidenheid van alternatiewe energiebronne, soos branderkrag, seestrome en geotermiese energie, wat diep boorgate die aarde se hitte deur sy kors ontgin. Enige of al die bronne kan bydra tot die energienetwerk, maar meeste van hulle is nog ver van gereed om dit te kan doen.
Ons moet 'n groot verskuiwing teweegbring oor die volgende 20-30 jaar, waar ons wegbeweeg van dominant steenkoolvervaardigde elektrisiteit na 'n skoner energie basis. Dit begin by kernkrag, dit sluit wind in, dit sluit sonkrag aan, en dan natuurlik ook die invoer van grootmaat hidroelektrisiteit.
Solar is a technology whose time, I believe, is coming.
I'm certainly a big better on solar, and I think we can do much more on solar than we have done so far.
Maar dit het dieselfde probleem as wind. Wat gebeur oornag wanneer die son nie skyn nie? Of wanneer dit bedags bewolk is? Verskeie lande werk reeds om sonkrag te kan stoor, maar die tegnologie is nog baie jong. Spanje, in die besonder, is nie net die nuwe wêreld sokkerkampioene nie, hulle doen ook gevorderde werk om iets te ontwikkel wat gesmelte soutberging genoem word. Enorme hoeveelhede sout word bedags gesmelt wanneer die son skyn. Dan, snags, word die hitte gebruik om stoomturbines te draai. So kan hulle 24 uur per dag aanhou om elektrisiteit op te wek. Die tegnologie het nog 'n pad om te loop, maar dis meer as die moeite werd om dit te ondersoek. Eskom dink juist daaraan om 'n 100 megawatt sonkragstasie met die soort berging te bou.
En hier is ons nou by die kern van ons storie. Ons land kan mos nie net sy energiesekuriteit afhanklik maak van ontwikkelende tegnologieë nie, al is hulle ook hoe belovend. Ons gaan alle energiebronne nodig hê wat ons kan kry, en hulle almal moet nagevors word.
Dit bring ons by kernkrag. Hoe lyk die prentjie daar? 400 kernkragstasies verskaf omtrent 15% van die wêreld se elektriese energie, en hulle doen dit nou vir bykans 20 jaar en langer. Frankryk het 58 reaktors wat byna 80% van hulle elektrisiteit opwek. Hierdie elektrisiteit is relatief goedkoop en kan maklik uitgevoer word na buurlande. Daarbey word die vrylating van enorme hoeveelhede koolstofdioksied vermy. En Lesbos Frankryk het nog nooit 'n kernkragongeluk gehad nie, omdat, soos hulle sê, moderne reaktors aan die mees gevorderde ingenieursstandaarde onderwerp word. En, soos Kuiberg, is hulle ook onderworpe aan die strengste beheermaatreëls in toesig deur nasionale en internasionale kernkragveiligheidsowerhede.
There's consensus that we need to stop putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. That means we need to get away from coal, phase it out. Won't happen tomorrow, we need to phase it out. But nuclear and renewables are the new partners for the future.
Ek sien 'n nuwe toekoms hierso waar entrepreneurs, gemeenskappe, individue kan krag begin opwek, is dit by hulle huise, op sy plaas of in 'n gemeenskap. Suiwer die sonpanele op te sit, windmolens op te sit en hierdie energie vir hulle self te gebruik en 'n oormaat daarvan te verkoop in die netwerk in. Dis heeltemal in teenstelling met die ou model waar jy groot enkele maatskappye soos Eskom het wat die alleenverskaffer van al die krag moet wees.
After the break, we find out what Eskom's plans are to provide the country with baseload energy into the future.
Ons het na die voor- en nadele van al die moontlike hoë vlak elektrisiteitsverskaffing gaan kyk. En vanaand het ons Dr. Steve Lennon van Eskom se korporatiewe aangelede by ons in die ateljee. Ons gaan hom vra wat hulle dink die regte kombinasie van energieopsies is, wat Suid-Afrika onderhoudbaar die toekoms sal indra.
Dr. Lennon, thank you very much for joining us. We hear lots of fantastic talk about renewable energy, but every time Eskom announces a big new project, it's another coal-fired power station.
Simon, you're right. But we mustn't forget that we have got quite a lot of renewables already in our energy mix. We've got 600 megawatts worth of hydro, which is the Geriep and the Van der Kloof plants. And then we import around about 1,500 megawatts also of hydro from Mozambique. So that means that already around about 5% of our generation capacity in South Africa is made up of renewables. But I think that if we have a look at moving ahead, we will see renewables playing a much bigger role into the future.
Let's stick with coal for a moment. We've got Medupi and we've got Kusile on the horizon. After that, what's coming up in terms of coal?
Medupi and Kusile are probably the last of this generation of coal plants that would be built in South Africa. We'll be seeing advanced clean coal technologies coming to the fore. We've been running a pilot called underground coal gasification, whereby you produce gas underground in the coal seam, you take that gas out, and you then put that into a gas turbine. That is a very advanced, low-cost clean coal technology. We've also been doing a lot of work into carbon capture and sequestration. Now, not a particularly elegant technology and something that is only likely to be commercial in probably 15, 20 years' time. But it could play a role in the longer term in coal in South Africa.
With the concerns around global warming, it's quite difficult to attract foreign investments for coal-fired stuff. Is that in any way offset by an increase in enthusiasm for investing in renewables?
I think so. I think that on the one hand, there is still appetite for investing in coal, but it needs to be clean coal. So if we look at Medupi and Kusile, both of those are already clean coal plants. They're supercritical, which means that they're higher efficiency than anything else that we're using at the moment. They do, however, still emit a lot of CO2. So there is still appetite for clean coal investment. There is a lot of appetite for funding of renewables. For example, as part of the World Bank loan that we were recently granted, it included the financing for a 100 megawatt wind farm and a 100 megawatt solar thermal plant, as well as an energy efficiency project, which is a road to rail project.
The Clinton Foundation has been investing millions into solar research up in Uppington, and we've read these reports of Eskom looking at an installation up there to the tune of about 150 billion, I think.
We have been working together with the South African government and the Clinton Climate Initiative to develop the concept of what's called a solar park. We have got a region in South Africa, and that is that region around Uppington in the Northern Cape, which has amongst the best solar insolation rates in the world. In other words, the energy that we can collect from the sun in that area is better than many other places in the world. It also has a very high number of cloud-free days. So it's a wonderful place for us to build a solar hub in the power network for South Africa.
Can you give us an idea of the percentage breakdown in our energy mix we could expect maybe in 20 or 30 years' time in South Africa?
The percentage of renewables, which would be wind, solar, and new hydro, in the energy mix in 2030 could be as high as around about 15%.
That's actually a tiny proportion.
Yes.
Is there any hope of protecting the coal that is under places, sensitive areas like the Soutpansberg and the Waterberg and Mapungubwe, or do we just need to accept that all of that is going to get mined in the future?
Whilst a 2030 picture of renewables at 15% may seem low, it's a lot higher than anything we have at the moment. And the picture that I'm talking about is still a low emissions future for South Africa. It's a low CO2 future because there's also a very big element of nuclear in that plan, and there's also a big element of gas. But what about the future of coal and coal mining? Something like underground coal gasification has the potential to release massive reserves of coal that are currently unminable with minimal environmental impacts. We need to go through the right processes relating to environmental impact assessments on any developments, including coal mining, and then making sure that if we are going to accept a negative impact, that is in the overall best economic, social and environmental advantage of the country.
On that note, nuclear obviously a highly emotive issue, not just in South Africa, but I think everywhere. But that's obviously got to play a substantial role in our future.
It's recognized that in any climate strategy, in any country, that nuclear has to play a role if we're going to address the challenges of getting CO2 emissions down substantially. There's a whole lot of negative public perceptions, and it's up to us to change those perceptions and make sure that the public is aware of what the facts are around nuclear. To say that, well, Chernobyl is a great concern and a modern nuclear fleet is definitely not the case. It's a completely different technology that we're talking about here. Your nuclear power generation is amongst the safest forms of power generation available. Then there's the issue of waste. And if you look at a plant like Koeberg over its entire life, which could be 50 years, the total waste that is produced from Koeberg would be stored on site. And there's processes now available for the reprocessing of that waste to extract additional energy.
Aside from the waste and the sort of emotional concerns about nuclear, it's very much a not in my backyard, not in my coastline issue as well.
We all want to live our lives and ensure that we are not disturbed by having any enormous developments in our immediate vicinity. This is the dilemma that we have to work with as individuals. We say we don't want it in our backyard, but we can understand nationally there is a need for electricity to be produced, whether it's from nuclear or wind or coal, and then transmitted and taken to the customer. And I think that that's what the environmental impact assessment process is about. Consult with individuals, get their input, have all of those concerns expressed, and then come to a decision that's in the overall interest.
The feed-in tariff has been a big one lately. One of the technologies left off there was PV solar, which I think disappointed a lot of people, particularly because the German model of small-time individuals having these panels on their roofs and then selling that power into the grid worked so wonderfully well.
The current feed-in tariff doesn't really cater for small-scale generation. That doesn't mean to say that people can't go for small-scale generation. It just means that they can't feed any excess back into the grid. However, there's nothing to stop you putting photovoltaic panels on your house and getting the advantage of a reduction in your electricity bill. We do have in South Africa a uniquely South African thin-film photovoltaic technology, and we should be encouraging its use and the development of a local industry around photovoltaics.
Are we due to go back into load shedding in 2011, 2012, as has been rumoured?
We do know that in the next 2 years, things are going to be very tight until the first big unit at Medupi comes on stream. And we don't want to see load shedding in South Africa ever again. And that means all of us need to value electricity a lot more. Use less, not just by switching off your geysers and your lights, but by putting in fewer geysers and fewer lights and being a lot more aware of how important and precious energy is in our society.
Steve, thank you very much for coming into 50/50. It's been a pleasure having you here.
Thanks, Simon.
Moving along with energy, the South African Solar Challenge 2010 is a 2-week race in solar-powered cars through the length and breadth of South Africa.
Spanne moet hul eie karre bou, hul eie ingenieursstelsels ontwerp en dan teen mekaar meeding. Die spanne wissel van plaaslike hoërskole tot by 'n geborgde Japaneese span met 'n kar van $20 miljoen. Maar dit gaan nie net oor geld nie, dis oor verbeelding en innovering.
most fantastic range of cars, from the world leader down to a South African high school. Tell me about that.
Absolutely. The world champions Tokai, we're absolutely pleased to have them here. They are defending champions. I think they love this race. They see it very much as a training exercise for races like the Australian race. So certainly they're welcome in South Africa. And we're trying to get South African people involved in this. I certainly hope that having a school involved will get the universities to realize that they can actually do this. Because most of the time when we speak to them, they say, oh no, it's too big a task for a university. And well, I think the school did it. They need to stand up to the plate and show that they can meet the requirements.
There's such a focus on trying to get science and technology into our high schools. What went so right with this? It was the German school in Johannesburg.
The German school in Johannesburg, absolutely. I think they had the right commitment from their teachers. Their teachers sort of backed the project right from the beginning. They had parents that sort of climbed in and helped, because there's no way a high school is going to be able to weld and things like that. So it's a joint project that brings together the sort of parents, the students, as well as the teachers at the school.
These are not the sort of cars that we're going to see on our roads in 5 years' time, or are they?
They're definitely not the sort of cars we're going to see on the roads in 5 years' time. In the same way that Formula One builds a base platform for developing automotive technologies, solar cars build a base platform for developing electric car technologies. So what we've seen in all of these cars is certainly the future of what the electric cars and the technologies that are going to go into electric cars. But what we've seen at the extreme here is the energy efficiency.
You can have loads of time.
The Tokai car, obviously a solar car. Top car in the world. They built the car towards the middle of 2009. It's got a 2 kilowatt motor in it, 25 kilograms worth of lithium-ion batteries, capable of speeds up to 160, 170 kilometers an hour, which they haven't done in South Africa. They've stuck to the speed limits, otherwise we would have had them off the race. The other two solar cars, the one is the German school from Johannesburg. They're capable of speeds up to about 70 kilometers an hour. Their full range for a day is maybe around 60 to 80 kilometers, then depending on sunlight. Obviously also depending on the terrain that they're following. So if it's a lot of uphills, then they'll do less. If it's a lot of downhills, they'll do a bit more.
As when we started, we weren't so sure if we're going to do what we expected, but now we actually did more than we expected, so we are pretty happy.
The other two vehicles that we have on the race are in what we call the technology demonstration part of the race. The first one is the team from Germany. They were attempting to break the world record for distance covered in a single day, on a single charge. They had various motor problems on their most optimum time. So they've done, I think on a single charge, probably about 750 kilometers on a single charge. And then the fifth and final car is from the University of Johannesburg. They've built a hydrogen and fuel hybrid. Now, it's a three-wheeler. You'll see what is quite amazing for me is that the car is entirely built by the electrical engineering people. Because when they approached the mechanical engineers said, it's not possible to build a car in 6 months. So the electrical engineer said, well, we've got a system, we need to put a car around it, and they built the car. So it's a team I'm very proud of. I think they should be showing Southern universities, it can be done, and university students can do it, and they can build something that can travel huge distances on the roads.
Your next event is 2012. If people see this and think this is something they want to get involved in, do they have time to develop a car in 2 years?
They definitely have time. They need to start as quickly as possible. We'd like to see cars coming to the start line with already having 2,000 to 3,000 kilometers on tracks or being tested with. So the time to get ready is now, and to start building for it, designing and testing the different components. The successful solar cars is really it's an assembly of successful components.
That seems like a lot of fun, and perhaps some new design will come out of it. After the break, a new anti-poaching initiative in the rhino wars.
Nuwe GPS-tegnologie is in die laaste jaar aangepas en ontwikkel in 'n poging om renosters teen stropery te beveilig.
Bonne joined the team to test the new equipment.
50-50 het die afgelope maande baie stories gedoen oor ons renosters en hulle noodtoestand en stryd teen uitwissing. Maar uiteindelik is daar lig aan die einde van die tonnel. Ons is hier in die Mafeking Natuurreservaat waar ons 5 renosters gaan tag met 'n GPS-tagsisteem. Hierdie sisteem gee vir ons 24 uur inligting oor die bewegings van die renoster en dit stel ons in kennis wanneer hulle na 'n angstsituasie verkeer. Die wind is redelik sterk, so ons gaan probeer om in die helikopter op te gaan en vanuit die helikopter te verdoof. Anders gaan ons te voet moet gaan, maar kom ons kyk wat gebeur. Die renoster word vanuit die helikopter met doofpylgeweer verdoof en binne sekondes is hy aan die slaap. Ons beweeg in om hulle oë en ore te bedek om hulle kalm te hou, selfs al is hulle verdoof. Dit word met ongelooflike sorg en versigtigheid gedoen. 'n Gat word geboor in die horing tot op 'n spesifieke diepte en die tag word ingesit. Die batteryleeftyd van die tag is ongeveer 3 jaar. Die alarm wat gestuur word dui aan watter renoster in die moeilikheid is en ook presies waar met die hulp van GPS-koördinate. Die posisie kan dan ook op 'n beskermde webwerf via die internet op 'n Google-kaart gesien word.
Wat die stelsel uniek maak en effektief maak, is die feit dat die stelsel letterlik elke minuut inligting van die renosters ontvang. Die inligting is verskeie goed. In terme van teen poaching is die belangrike die bewegingspatroon van die renosters. Wat die stelsel letterlik doen is om die bewegingspatroon van die renoster, 'n gemiddelde bewegingspatroon vas te stel. En dan sou daar afwyking wees daarvan. Nou dit is wiskunde en daar's baie toetse gedoen, so ons weet wanneer daar afwyking is, dan stuur die stelsel 'n alarm.
Ja, man. Die stelsel is al getoets by verskeie renosters. Dit is basies soos om jou naels te sny en die dier voel geen pyn nie. Die veearts monitor die renoster die heeltyd. Na die werk gedoen is, word die teenmiddel toegedien en die dier word wakker sonder enige nagevolge. Nog 'n renoster met 24 uur bewaring. Na gister se sukses by die Mafeking Natuurreservaat, waar ons bietjie meer geleer het oor die nuwe GPS-stelsel vir renosters, is ons in kennis gestel van 3 renosters wat in Pilanesberg in die afgelope 48 uur doodgeskiet is en hulle horings is verwyder. En ons is nou hier op die toneel en ek moet sê dit is nogal 'n demper op 'n mens se gemoed. Hierdie stelsel is 'n moontlike oplossing teen die oorlog wat tans geveg word om ons renosters te beskerm. Ons renosters ly en ons as hulle bewaarders kan nie meer magteloos toe kyk nie. Kyk hier, ek meen hoe verskriklik is dit? Die horings is verwyder en 'n forensiese span moet versigtig deur die renosterkarkas met 'n metaalverklikker gaan om die moontlike koels op te spoor. Enige bewyse kan kry van wat presies hier gebeur het en wie verantwoordelik is. Hier is die koels opgespoor, maar net gedeeltes en sal nie help met vervolging nie. Praktykdor span kragte saam met Noordwes Sparkeraad om hopelik 'n verskil te maak in die manier waarop ons hierdie magiese diere beskerm.
Seems like trying to keep criminals at bay is still South Africa's fastest growing industry. But back to energy, and this time a little less sophisticated, when the eco-warriors checked out a small biodigester at Green. That's the Greater Edendale Environmental Network in KwaZulu-Natal.
In die moderne era word dit al hoe duideliker hoe afhanklik ons van elektrisiteit is. Dit vat net 'n paar kragonderbrekings om te besef dat ons nie daarsonder kan klaarkom nie. En dit is veral in areas soos hierdie waar ons kan sien hoe belangrik elektrisiteit in ons daaglikse lewens is.
Uma kukhona i-organization that is worthy of being our eco-warriors, i-Green Network, espearhead uSandile Ndawonde, bona-ke bawongqoshishilize ekucwaningeni iy'ndlela ey'hlukile zokusave ugesi. And that's his house.
Moet jy weer sê uit?
It's got the solar panels.
Sandile is die stigter en koördineerder van die Green Network, 'n nie-regeringsorganisasie gebaseer in Pietermaritzburg. Hy is passievol vir die bevordering van die Edendale Vallei en het talle toekennings agter sy naam vir sy werk. Die Green Network het onlangs hernubare energie veldtog geloods om die gemeenskap aan te moedig om alternatiewe energiebronne te ondersoek. Sandile se huis is ten volle toegerus met 'n sonne-energiestelsel.
Uma besizodependa kakhulu kule conventional energy la Eskom lokho kufaka ipressure kuyona imvelo ngoba siyazi ukuthi phela ugesi uphuma emalahleni inyukubeza imvelo and then phinde futhi inyukubeze nesimo sezulu kanti uma besishintshela ngalana kule renewable energy sisebenzayo iyakwazi ukuthi yehlise ukunyukubezeka phela kwezulu kwesikwazi phela ukuthi siqhubeke siphile.
So 'n warm dag en hierdie panele sekerlik baie krag opvang. Hoe lyk dit daar binne?
Ja, let's go see. Awuchaza ukuthi lo gesi usebenza kanjani?
Lo gesi usebenza kanje, usuka ipanel yonke lapha kunepanel phezulu ehamba ugesi uze la kahle ukuthi uzofika ema-battery. Kodwa uma usebenzisa kufanele ube nesiqiniseko sokuthi uyawucisha lokho Eskom njengoba sengucishile nje manje. Le plug yami lena ke iyona esebenza yonke ithatha konke ugesi ke manje ususa la ufake la bese iyakhuphula ke uthi njengoba ubona iredo la on manje.
So njengoba i-ready si-on nje sekusebenza wonke ugesi le endlini
nokukhanyisa futhi ngikhanyisa futhi ngawo lo gesi welanga.
Why lo gesi ungasabalaliswa kubo bonke abantu?
imali bathi uyabiza wona kona uyabiza ngempela kona ngoba mase ubheka abantu abebethola ugesi mahhala manje kufanele bathole lokho kufanele bakhokhe imali esuka la 6000 kuyaphezulu. So ke inhloso yethu njengale project sifisa ukuthi abantu beze bazobona and futhi bafundiseke ukuze bawamukele ngoba nje uhulumeni benosikhombi bafuna ukurola babona abantu bethule bengawudimandi lo gesi.
Die Green Network bestudeer alternatiewe energiebronne en een van hulle is die biovergasser wat bronne gebruik wat vrylik beskikbaar is in landelike gebiede.
Ons is in Wilgersfontein, ons gaan met Albert Mhlongo gesels. Hy is die tegniese direkteur van die Green Network.
Ubaba uMhlongo-ke uzakhele yena lo mshini obizwa nge-biodigester. Sayosibona-ke sikhombisa namathupha.
Die uitvindsel gebruik vars koeimis om metaangas te maak wat gebruik word om mee te kook.
Baba uMhlongo, iyona i-biodigester le?
No, leni mixing bay lena. Esimixela yona ubulongwe namanzi. Sholo ukuthi lana-ke siyasifaka u5 liter obulongwe, sifake u10 liter wamanzi.
Die vars mis. Baba, so it must be fresh.
Ja, sifaka obu-fresh, hayi obusebomile sebubudala.
Nadat 5 liter vars koeimis met 10 liter water gemeng word die mengsel vrygelaat in die filtreerput, waar die onnodige soliede stukkies fisies verwyder word. Die mengsel vloei vanaf die filtreerput na die biovergasser buis, waar die mengsel gis en metaangas vorm. Die metaangas styg en word met behulp van 'n pyp na die kombuis en die stoof vervoer. Die oorblywende mengsel vloei dan met 'n ander pyp uit, waar dit as kompos vir die groentetuin dien. Dit is duidelik dat niks hier gemors word nie. Sandile en Baba Mhlongo moes baie navorsing doen om die stelsel te verbeter en het verskeie dinge geleer op die probeer is die beste geweer metode. Soos die dreineringsstelsel wat verhoed dat water in die stoof se gas opeindig.
It was a great help to us because my husband is not working, he's a pensioner, and I'm also not working. We used to pay about 150 to 200 rand per month, but now it's cut down to half because now I only use this gas for cooking. I used to go outside and cook stamp and beans, but now I'm cooking by this biogas. So everything has been changed for us. We're getting a little bit of money to put in our grocery because the food is so expensive.
Zama, ek vind dit nou baie moeilik om te glo dat ons so 'n heerlike koppie tee te danke het aan koeimis.
Ja, but okusho kona ngempela ukuthi nature has all the answers.
Ja.
After the break, Cape Town City does away with bottled water.
Earlier this year, in It's Up to Us, Jared explained the huge cost that plastic bottled water has on the environment.
Sedertdien het Jared die goeie nuus gekry van raadslid Stuart Pringle dat Kaapstad besluit het om 'n stop te sit aan die gebruik van gebottelde water in al hul departemente.
After our story on bottled water, we found out some fantastic news. Councillor Stuart Pringle from the DA has got a motion passed in the City of Cape Town Council which stops the city from using bottled water in all meetings with councillors and officials.
Jared, I believe that the City of Cape Town needs to set an example, and bottled water is really a luxury item. We have the best water in Africa here in the City of Cape Town. We have blue drop status, and it didn't make a lot of sense to me that we as councillors and public representatives buy bottled water when our water is of such a high quality. And effectively, bottled water has a major impact on the environment and also a major economic impact on the City of Cape Town. Just as an example, in 2008-2009, the City of Cape Town spent 125,000 rand buying bottled water. That's about 23,000 litres of water at a cost of about 70,000 litres of water, about 9,000 kilograms of fossil fuels being depleted, and about 6,000 kilograms of greenhouse gases being emitted. So as a city, we need to take the lead in cutting back on that kind of environmental damage that bottled water actually causes.
How has the response been so far regarding this motion in the government departments?
This motion has been very well supported. The response has been very, very positive.
What is your message to people and companies out there?
I believe that we've all got a role to play in caring for the environment. And irrespective of the size of the company, every company can do something. And individuals as well may not feel that they can make massive contributions, but they can take steps to minimize the impact on our environment.
This is such awesome news, and let's hope that people and companies will follow by the City of Cape Town's example, because it's up to us.
Now for those baboons and badgers in Veld Focus.
Good evening, folks, and welcome.
Goedenavond en welkom bij Veld Focus.
Howard Pote from Grahamstown has been visiting the Sam Knott Nature Reserve for 5 years to watch the baboons there. And he particularly likes to watch them drink. And he wanted to capture this on video.
'n Babiaan is 'n ding met sy eie gedagtes. En op die sonnige dag was baljare in die water duidelik 'n groter prioriteit as om water te drink.
Babiaan is gewoonlik vroeg in die oggend en laatmiddag besig met sosiale bedrywighede. En op die warmste deel van die dag is hulle veronderstel om te rus. Maar duidelik nie wanneer daar 'n kans is vir 'n bietjie pret nie.
Om te speel dien 'n baie belangrike rol. Dit help die jonger diere om die sosiale rangorde onder hulle self te bepaal. Dit is veral belangrik vir die mannetjies, want die Bobbejaan-gemeenskap word deur rangorde gedryf en word deur die mannetjies oorheers.
Play is also important to hone skills and exercise muscles that are needed later on in life. Baboons are long-lived. Like humans and elephants, they take time to grow up.
Daar is vele dinamikas wat onsself uitspeel onder 'n trop bobbejane waarvan die betekenis nie altyd vir die waarnemer so ooglopend is nie. Om 'n ander te versorg en te roskam is 'n manier wat swakker lede vir die trop gebruik om die guns van sterker lede te wen en om sodoende toegang tot meer hulpbronne te verkry.
And you do need good friends and allies to gain advantage over larger, more dominant animals. So in play, ganging up on one another is all too common.
Howard het opgemerk dat een van die jong mannetjies homself nie kon laat skeel deur die manlikheidstoetse wat rondom hom aangegaan het nie. Die kerel was daar net om sy swemsessie te geniet en hy het selfs met sy kop onder die water ingeduik.
Until the bullies noticed him and it was back to business as usual. Thank you very much to Howard for that very entertaining entry.
Ons praat nou so van toetse wat mannetjies moet slaag, maar die volgende greep wys duidelik hoe sterk moederskap-eienskappe in die natuur kan wees.
Lars Svensson en sy seun Jeffrey besoek die Kruger Wildtuin vir jare lank. En is beloon met hierdie merkwaardige toneel van 'n luiperd wat 'n hinderlaag stel net by 'n dam buite Satara.
Onsigbaar agter 'n boomstomp het die luiperd gespanne gewag. Die dorstige groepie vlakvarke, 'n wyfie en 2 kleintjies, was salig onbewus van sy teenwoordigheid en die gevaar wat daar skuil.
Quick as lightning, the leopard launches an attack, and while the piglets scatter, the female stands her ground to protect her brood, but to her own detriment.
'n Vlakvark se slagtande is 'n formidabele wapen en moet glad nie ligtelik benader word nie. Maar met sy spoed en brute krag maak die luiperd hierdie keer korte mette van die arme vlakvark.
Unbelievably, the young warthogs, unsettled by the squealing no doubt, risk coming right up to the leopard to have a closer look.
Let op na die wit snorbaarde aan die kante van hul gevrete. Dit is daar om slagtande na te boots en om die kleiner varkies meer intimiderend te laat lyk voor hul verdedigingswapens begin groei het.
2 vlakvarkbere benader ook die watergat versigtig en blyk meer geïnteresseerd te wees in die water as